So I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker, who is Diana Bamoya, who is the KeyBank professor and chair of organizational behavior at Case Western Reserve, and a highly regarded scholar in the field of diversity and leadership, and that the Chancellor raised as an issue this morning. So I am really looking forward to hearing, learning from her experience on the best ways to achieve equity in leadership. So, Diana. Oops. Still not on? Okay, all right, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Professors Linda Bisson and Karen McDonald, and all of the organizers of this extraordinary roundtable. And congratulations on your most impactful advanced institutional transformation project. So today what I'm going to do is describe the leadership development initiatives undertaking at or through my university, Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. By leadership development, I refer especially to the inputs provided that educate, inspire, empower, and equip women and men faculty and administrators about their roles in creating and sustaining positive and supportive workplace climates, to exercise change leadership, to diversify and transform their units and their universities for the better, to serve as mentors, advocates, role models, and examples of excellence to others, and to pursue opportunities for broader leadership in national and international bodies. Such inputs may be provided through education, training, mentoring, coaching, and responsibility for change action projects. And I will describe all of these through initiatives undertaken at Case Western Reserve University that focus on these. The main point I want to make is that by engaging in systematic leadership development across genders, ranks, and disciplines, universities can build the talent pipeline of women and men faculty leaders who are ready to take on challenges, and thereby increasing the diversity of their leadership. Let me start by providing a brief picture of Case Western Reserve University. We are a small private university located in Cleveland, Ohio, established in 1826, ranked 38 in the US by US News and World, about 5,000 undergrad and about 6,000 graduate students, about 3,100, 3,150 full-time faculty. About half of those are in our medical school, and many of those are on the clinical tracks. We have 8 schools and a college, and are ranked in the top 20 private universities based on federal research funding. I'm going to start by describing the Advanced Information Transformation Award, Institutional Transformation Award, that we received over the 5-year period, 2003 through 2008. In this project, we initiated a number of different themes and activities at 3 different levels. At the university leadership level, particularly focusing on the accountability of deans for diversity, the commitment of senior administrators, changing of structures and policies. That includes new offices that were created, such as the Office of Equal Opportunity, Inclusion, and Diversity. Annual retreat for leadership, including the deans and chairs across the university. Faculty climate improvement initiatives, including the faculty climate surveys that are now repeated every 3 years, and annual monitoring of gender equity data. At the school and department levels, we engage in a multiplex of initiatives as well, starting with search committee training, department chair leadership development, and coaching, mentoring, networking, and training and development inputs for deans, chairs, and women faculty in STEM areas. I'll focus mostly on a combination of those items as well as the chair development as well. At the individual level, the Advanced IT project also focused on students in terms of gender awareness training and minority student pipelines, including summer programs and other kinds of programs to help bring more individuals to campus. And also distinguished lectureships, opportunity grants, and different forms of coaching available to all women faculty. At the end of this project, which was about 2008, we had to transition to another set of initiatives, which were, of course, absorbed by the university. And unlike other universities which received a huge influx of money to continue and support their programming, one of the hallmarks of our program were that we had to cobble together the programs that really worked well and find, in an entrepreneurial way, the funding that would support these going forward. We have an extraordinarily influential and positive vice provost for academic affairs, Lynn Singer, who's been single-handedly responsible for the institutionalization of many of these projects and programs, which I will refer to as we go forward. A second advanced grant that we received subsequent to the IT grant was a paid award. And the paid award was to bring together a partnership of 6 universities in our region. And you'll see them listed here in the first bullet point. So that was Bowling Green, Cleveland State, Kent State, University of Akron, and University of Toledo. These formed a partnership essentially for leadership development. And the goal of this partnership was to develop a cohort of formal and informal STEM leaders at each partner institution to implement, adapt, and sustain customized gender equity-related change on individual campuses. For each of the 3 years of this project, we held 4 leadership development sessions annually, and each project team at each partner campus initiated projects such as faculty climate surveys and focus groups, search committee training, mentoring programs, launch committees, training workshops, and research on candidate pools. This is just a fraction of the variety of projects that were across these 6 universities. The outcomes of these transformation projects, very, very small investments, not at the level of the institutional transformation grants, but really small investments, less than $10,000 a year, $10,000 a year, yielded outcomes such as the establishment of a presidential task force on women in STEM, the creation of a faculty enrichment and leadership center at Cleveland State, and inclusion of faculty diversity goals in strategic planning for the University of Akron. Here we show the changes in the number of tenure-track faculty across the 6 universities that formed this partnership called IDEAL, which is Institutions Developing Excellence in Academic Leadership. So the blue is pre-grant activities, and the maroon is post. And you can see that in the STEM areas, despite an overall decline in the faculty numbers, especially as represented by male faculty in this chart, but across all of these 6 universities, there was a decline in faculty numbers on the tenure track. Despite that, we could show an increase in the number of women faculty. It's a very small increase, I know, across 6 universities, but it's still significant given the decline overall. And again, the same pattern with underrepresented minority faculties. Another interesting set of outcomes was around the leadership of these STEM areas. And again, across the 6 universities, we saw that endowed chairs in the STEM areas increased from 12 to 16 for women, and department chairs increased from 9 to 16 for women as well. And there were not such significant increases for underrepresented minority endowed chairs and department chairs. But nevertheless, there were some minor increases. What these outcomes tell us is that systematic leadership development can yield the kinds of outcomes that we want to see. In fact, of all of the participants in the ideal leadership development program, and we had approximately 55 participants across the 3-year project in this leadership development program. At the end of the 3 years, about 25 of them either received promotions or received new challenges or new positions, maybe center directors or department chairs or some other form of an advancement in their career. One of the signature items of our Institutional Transformation Award, and then subsequent to that, was a program we called academic coaching. And academic coaching consisted of 2 different elements, one which we call executive coaching and one which we call hotline coaching. Executive coaching was the provision of a professional coach. This is somebody who's hired from outside the university but is very familiar with academic policies and practices, and in fact, in many cases, were professors at other universities in our area. And this kind of academic coaching was provided to all deans, chairs of the STEM departments. First, originally in our IT project, only to the STEM department chairs, but then as we institutionalized beyond, to every dean and chair available in the university. We also provided three sessions focused essentially on leadership development for all new or newly promoted or tenured women faculty in the STEM disciplines. Because these activities only focused on the STEM areas, we also opened up another kind of coaching, which we called hotline coaching. This was any kind of opportunity or issue or problem that may have come up for any faculty member across the entire university. We would provide a professional coach to help them explore their options and to determine the path of action that they would want to move forward with. We've created a very systematic way of doing this academic coaching, which has been replicated in many, many other universities across the advanced community. We created what we call the leadership retreat for all deans and chairs across the university. To date, we've had 10 such half-day retreats. We bring in keynote speakers, much like a session like today. But this is attended literally by all department chairs and all deans across the university. And the range of topics include both gender equity-related things, topics, as well as general leadership. In more recent years, we've focused more on a broader sense of leadership to improve the culture of the departments. And topics include things like resistance to change, academic leadership, improving department climate, and innovations in academia. At each of these retreats, the annual gender equity indicators are presented and discussed, usually within school or college groups. Again, we found this to be a very useful way of disseminating gender equity-related data, which otherwise never gets the kind of attention and visibility it deserves. We initiated a leadership development program for department chairs recently, in the last 4 years or so. And it consists of 2 lunchtime sessions around each semester. We operate on a semester basis, so it's fall and spring. And they're usually interactive sessions. There's usually a speaker, but there's also a lot of dialogue. Topics, the kind of range of topics include things like managing faculty conflict, recruiting women and URM faculty, faculty climate survey findings, best practices in annual faculty evaluation, policies and implementation, including EEOC, university strategic plan implementation, and so on. A new way of integrating the faculty development activities across the campus was through our establishment of an Office of Faculty Development, which provides key resources across the university to strengthen and advance the recruitment and retention of all faculty members at CASE. And there's a partnership essentially with each of the schools and colleges which may have an associate dean for development and diversity as well. We also instituted a new university-wide body called the Faculty Development Council, which consists of one representative from each of the schools and the colleges and advises both the Provost's office as well as the Office of Faculty Development. And that Faculty Development Council meets twice a semester as well. We started a program called To Tenure and Beyond. And this was started through our IDEAL project, the NSF paid grant that we had earlier. It was so successful in leadership development across the 6 universities that we wanted to bring it in-house as well. And so what we started was a required training, if you will, or educational program called To Tenure and Beyond for all second-year faculty across the university. So no matter which discipline, STEM or otherwise, male or female faculty are required to be there. And the school and college deans sponsor these. They literally pay some money for this program, so it increases buy-in. The goal is to increase the pre-tenured faculty understanding of the tenure process and to assist them in career planning and leadership development beyond tenure as well. A variety of different program topics, as you can see. Also supplemented with a whole Lunch and Learn program, which is also more dialogue-based and more conversational about topics like career vision, getting research grants, developing influence, and so on. We started a new Center for Women program called the Women's Faculty Leadership Development Institute. So it's run by a Flora Stone Mather Center for Women. And the goal is to promote diversity through improved retention of women faculty and provide for the faculty development needs of women faculty scholars. There are a number of different programs that are initiated through the Women Faculty Leadership Development Institute. There's networking events, that's Women Faculty Connect. There's advice from women full professors. There's external and internal speaker series. And there's a program called What's Next, which is a program for mid-career women faculty. I'll describe that in just a moment. And there's also a once-a-year event that we hold called the Women of Achievement Awards. It's an annual award for women faculty nominated by each school for their extraordinary achievements and accomplishments. Let me speak to the What's Next program. It's a program that is essentially targeted at mid-career women faculty. So there's a lot of mentoring and coaching and a lot of efforts being put at early career faculty, but a lot of women faculty are somewhat stuck, oftentimes because of extra service burdens at the associate level or even sometimes at the professor level. So this is a program that's attended by both associate and full professors. We started this program, ran it twice with the tenure track women faculty. It was so successful that we opened it up for non-tenure track women faculty as well, the third time we ran it. And again, the goal is purposeful leadership development and planning of career. And it consists of 3 half-day sessions again. But the focus of the half-day sessions is the individual person, her leadership values and vision, how she defines academic leadership, and how she sees her identity as a leader developing. And also some skill development around negotiation, politics, power, some other topics like that. Interestingly, every one of these women receives a 360-degree feedback process where they receive feedback from their colleagues, their peers, their supervisors, lab people, or their students, whoever, in a 360 basis. And they receive 3 sessions of academic coaching as well to enable them to take that input and that feedback and create literally a plan for their leadership development into the future. The women faculty of the School of Medicine also have another program. It's called the FLEX program. The FLEX program is essentially for the clinical track faculty of the School of Medicine, which is, as I said before, more than 1,500 faculty. And it's an annual program. It's a competitive application. About I'd say, 30 to 40% of the applicants get accepted into this program. The goals are to empower women to pursue career opportunities with national and international presence and develop a leadership pipeline of skilled and qualified women. This program runs for 8 full days. It's spread over a 1-year period, plus 360 feedback and 3 one-hour coaching sessions. And you can see the range of the topics that are covered as well. Executive presence, effective communications, time management, leading relationships program, leadership skills. Again, these are not typical topics that women faculty in our School of Medicine would otherwise receive, but essential for leadership development. A number of other types of workshops that are also presented across the university. I only give you an example of one in our School of Engineering. This was a series of workshops around career development, essentially, teaching excellence, research resources, grant writing, so on. We initiated this is also through our advanced, almost everyone I've presented so far has been initiated by our advanced program in one form or the other. So we initiated an orientation for newly promoted or newly tenured faculty. As in most of our universities, the transition when one is promoted or tenured as a faculty member is it's a non-event, essentially. Nobody really knows what the difference is between being an associate and being a full, because nobody acknowledges that difference, really. So what we did was we created an orientation where these faculty members who've received some acknowledgement of progression in their careers actually get some inputs about things like how the institution operates, the flows of information, decision, and money within the university, the qualities of exceptional faculty leaders, and panel discussions with senior faculty leaders as well. We've had a whole set of initiatives around mentoring best practices and mentoring practices at Case Western Reserve, because ours is a highly decentralized university. Each school has literally brought up its own mentoring program. I give you just some examples of what seems to be working really well in some of these schools. The School of Dental Medicine sets up a mentoring committee for every new faculty member, and that happens within 4 months of their faculty appointment. And there's guidelines about what happens in those mentoring sessions. I believe they meet monthly. In the School of Management, we match every faculty who's less than 3 years in the university is matched with a senior faculty member, but not from their department, from another department, so that they get exposure to the wider school. At the School of Engineering, through our Ideal project, we had this extraordinary initiative called the Launch Committee Initiative. I know that here at the University of California, Davis, you are also using the launch committee idea and have taken it very far. So I congratulate all of you on that. It is a fantastic idea. We've run into a few difficulties in making it sustainable and institutionalized, primarily because we've had some turnover in the deans. And as the deans have turned over, it has been a little bit difficult to maintain the institutional progress on this. I've been speaking about women faculty extensively, but I also want to give you just a heads up that leadership development cannot just be for women faculty. It has to be for everyone, including staff members, students, and so on. Here's a type of project, although we do much more than this. This is just a snapshot. It's something called the Women's Staff Leadership Development Institute. So it's a mirror of the Women Faculty Leadership Development Institute. And again, this is an annual leadership program. Approximately 60 women staff participants. The goal is to increase the number of women and staff members with skills that enable more communication, collaboration, so on. It's extremely successful. This is one of our most successful leadership development programs in the sense that it's really developed a strong cohort of women staff members, many of whom are senior administrators at the central level at Central University. So, we continue with leadership development in many different facets. One other one that I want to point out for students, not just women faculty and staff, but this is for women students. It's a program called WISER, Women in Science and Engineering Roundtable. And again, it's open to all women and women students in the STEM areas. There's peer mentoring, there's professional mentoring, monthly workshops, panels, and outreach. So a number of ways by which students begin to sense what the path is for leadership development for them as well, not just for others. So I wanted to just make a plug for our new MOOC that is coming out. It's free to everyone, so I encourage you and others who want leadership development inputs but don't have a full program on it. Here's a free MOOC. It's through Coursera, and it will be available. I think it's available for registration right now. I want to just conclude what we have been talking about with regard to leadership development. Systematic, multi-level, and widespread leadership development educates, empowers, and equips formal university leaders, deans and chairs, for example, about their role in creating positive and supportive cultures in their units. It empowers women and men faculty, staff, and students to exercise change across the university, transforming their units and the university for the better, and pursuing opportunities for leadership presence outside of the university. It builds a talent pipeline for men and women leaders who are equipped and ready to take on the challenges. And it increases the diversity of leaders across the whole university and through our IDEAL project in the region as well. Thank you very much.
There seems to me to be an inherent tension in this leadership potential, or I'll note an empirical regularity. Deans do not like well-informed, strong department chairs, and you seem to be developing strong, well-informed department chairs. So how has that collided with the deans?
That's fabulous. Actually, we have data that shows through two different climate surveys, one in 2010 and one in 2014, that the culture of the departments as rated by faculty members, the most significant difference was the rating of the department chairs. Improving is what I mean. So between 2010 and 2014 in the climate survey, the most significant increase in climate was due to the ratings of department chairs being better, higher in the second survey as in the first. We do have that same tension a little bit as well. but we give so many inputs to the dean level as well, particularly associate deans. So we provide all of these various coaching and other inputs also to the deans and the associate deans. Several of our deans have gone through a coaching program. In fact, our current dean of engineering, who was given coaching during the initial advanced IT project, when he became dean subsequently, many years later, specifically requested getting a coach. So I think just providing more resources and encouraging leadership development has somewhat offset that tension.
I see from the sign we'll have time during the discussion this afternoon to ask more questions. I got the sign at 0 minutes. So I want to keep us on schedule.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Diana, for a great presentation. And yes, we will have time. We're under time constraints for exiting this room so they can set it up for Donna Shalella's presentation later. Okay, so our next speaker is Steve Roussos. He is the executive director of the Blum Center at the Office of Research at UC Merced, and also the director of community research and their health sciences research initiative. And he has been researching scholarship of engagement and the best way to value that in our promotion system. So I'm pleased to introduce Steve.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so inspired by what we've been hearing about, not just today, but last night, and just truly incredible work. I know lunch is coming, so I'm going to try to catch us up on time, but not go too quickly. Let's see here, make sure we're the right one. The work that I'll share with you today has been done very closely with my partner in crime, Robin DeLugan, an anthropologist. Together, we've been growing this idea of community-engaged research at UC Merced for, goodness, probably the last 7 or so years. And she couldn't be here today. I've been texting and emailing her, telling her how exciting the day has been, and she's here in spirit. So I definitely want to acknowledge Robin. I also have a couple of symbols up there that are very important to us in this work. And one is the Carnegie Foundation classification for community engaged institutions. This past January, UC Merced was honored with that recognition. And it may be one of the newest campuses to join the club. UC Davis is one, and so is UCLA. And it acknowledges institutions that are haven't necessarily made it, but they sure are trying hard to be community engaged in all the facets that many of us may define community engagement. This work is also supported by our Blum Center and also our Resource Center for Community Engaged Scholarship. And I want to give credit to our wonderful support from UCOP, the OP Fund. Susan Carlson, thank you for helping us launch some of the work that I'll be sharing with folks today. Two main things that I want to get across as key points, and really one is really examine this idea of community engaged research. Many of us may also call it community engaged scholarship, community engagement in general. We're using increasingly the word community engaged research. The definition is lacking, and I'll cover a little bit of that from our study results. But it is for us something that is more than just working with community as clients and partners, but really as peers. And this idea of what does community engagement mean when an institute of higher education is working as a peer with community, either geographically or by issue or a combination of both. This is something I dug up recently from a white paper from the National Science Foundation, which for some time has been promoting and focusing this idea of community engagement. I think many of the things we've heard so far reiterate what's on this slide, that really the challenges that science in all forms and all disciplines is trying to address is challenging in every community all over the world. Equity and reaching equity, whether it's by gender or ethnicity, sexual orientation, income and class, and all the other areas that we know are suffering from inequity, is a global problem. but thinking about improving that as scientists by tackling it locally and having a discussion globally and constantly connecting that global and local connection. I think much of what we've been talking about today obviously has tremendous global implications, since we know in terms of improving prosperity for regions, it is about educating women and helping women move out of poverty. Women move entire communities out of poverty. So this idea of equity in terms of science, whether it's in chemistry or physics or sociology, is much more broader than anything that many of us probably are thinking about locally. How do researchers and research talk about community-engaged work? I think the majority of what we tend to think about, maybe not us in the room, but many that think of the word community engagement and higher education, it comes to, well, you're serving someone, you're doing something of service, you're a scholar, but you're also maybe doing a presentation for a school. Maybe you're doing something on TV or in a blog. You're sharing your knowledge, which is very important. Community engagement also tends to be connected with this idea of fundraising, and which is very important to all of us in all institutes of higher education, that we would engage in relationships with community because of the benefits that would come to us, and then later on, of course, the knowledge gains that would transfer over to communities as well. But I think there's something that we're looking for, and which is really about this higher level of community engaged research, which are the 3 R's: rigor, relevance, and reach. Our colleagues Carolina Balzas and Rachel Morello Frosch put together a wonderful manuscript about the 3 R's, and it's looking at community-engaged research in a way that goes beyond relationship building, beyond reaching out for fundraising and support that we want, but thinking about how it really improves the science. The rigor of the research, whether you're asking a very fundamental conceptual question that no one has explored before, how could it include community stakeholders in really recognizing what is the importance of that question, and not waiting for that as an after effect or after fact of the research itself. The relevance of the research, obviously, and the reach. As many of us know, the struggle of actually translating the research into practice. How does community-engaged research advance, speed up, take us to a larger scale in terms of the reach of our science? In many ways, more so than the relationship building and more so than the fundraising, URM faculty and students are attracted to community-engaged research because of the 3 R's. Yes, they want to contribute to the communities, but it's really about becoming a better scientist and doing better science because of community engagement. Within their article, there's this wonderful graphic. The term at the end, it shows the continuum of community-engaged research. The term there is CBPR, which many of us are familiar with, community-based participatory research. Again, terminology and definitions, I think we have a long way to go in terms of how we define these things and what terms we use, but it applies, and it's very complementary with what we consider community-engaged research. On one end, this idea of helicopter science, which some ways could also be community-engaged. Helicopters do land somewhere, and that's important, and there's a value to that, of doing that kind of work. But helping prepare faculty and helping prepare graduate students and actually helping prepare community members to be active participants and peers throughout this continuum is really the idea of what we're trying to get to with community-engaged research. None of us really are at a point where we can leverage the power of community as knowledge disseminators and brokers as well as we could, and thinking of them as peers, not just in conducting the research, but probably one of the more difficult areas, which is interpreting what the results mean and how we apply those. So this continuum shows a variety of places we probably are all in right now, and we can be in more than one place. But I want you to think about that continuum as I share some of the results from our study. This is something, and most of the research in terms of URM and community engagement is really more at the undergraduate level, some at the graduate level and some at the faculty level that I think people have shared with today, but the predominant research is at the undergraduate level, really showing that URM students, undergraduates, are more likely to be retained in campuses, especially research universities, if they're engaged in some way in work that matters to them. I know at UC Merced, with our predominantly first-generation college-going students, many are expecting, whether they're working in a lab that's on campus or a community-based project off campus, they're expecting somehow to connect what they're learning with their family back home, with their neighborhood back home. And that's a very powerful reason for getting into research. Community-engaged research also seems to be almost an entryway into work that might be more STEM-related. I think in much of what I've said so far, I think the things apply to everything, STEM and non-STEM, but community-engaged work can be an entry point into higher levels of STEM. And increasingly graduate students, especially graduate students, for one reason or another, who are not looking to enter the academic field and want to go into industry or community work in general, are trying to find training programs that would teach them in the methods and principles of community-engaged research. These ideas obviously apply to faculty researchers as well. Why we get into this work, why URM faculty join and become community-engaged, and what keeps them in this type of work. The challenge is, how do we continue doing it? So we were able to gain some funding, which was critical from the UC office, the president, and for what's called an OP fund. And we did a very exploratory study. It included a survey, but then also meetings and discussions with colleagues at every single campus to share results and also critique the results, because this is a very, very small and exploratory study, as you'll see. But we were trying to do a few things. One is to understand the components of a definition. We did not seek out to define community-engaged research and what that means, but how are people talking about it and what words they're using to define it. Obviously, we're looking for how to preserve it. And with us, our focus was about infrastructure. The physical infrastructure, I think many of us have talked about so far in other presentations, and it reminds me of a conversation I just had earlier this morning about creating the ecology for actually maintaining and supporting community-engaged research. What are those infrastructure factors? And last but not least, part of the real reason for this work was to find buddies and partners who can continue working with us, which is what this conference is all about. So in terms of developing it, we did an extensive literature review of other similar projects. There's a lot of work out there about what are the infrastructure factors, what are the institutional systems changes that maintain community-engaged research. We had a lot of discussions with colleagues that are doing this work who helped guide us in the framing of the questions. And then we pilot tested and refined it a few times, I think 4 total. We ended up with a SurveyMonkey, 45 items. On average, I would say it probably took closer to 30 minutes in terms of after looking at what people commented and said, this was a very long survey. But they did it. Developing the survey sample was probably one of the most challenging and one of the most important things that I'd like to have you think about before we look at the actual results. There, unfortunately, is not a wonderful Yahoo Yellow Pages on who is and is not a community-engaged researcher. So we spent, I think, at least half of our time calling people, talking to people, looking at websites, being corrected many, many times of who is and who's not a community-engaged researcher, and why have you contacted these individuals. So this was an ongoing process. We actually continued identifying and recruiting people throughout the period, about a 1.5 year period. And we were looking for catchphrases. Is the word community in your title or your abstract or grant that you received or a paper you wrote? Obviously, that's not enough. Your title, what kind of work you've done. So for each individual that you'll see in the sample, a substantial amount of time was put into trying to figure out if someone else was to say, is this person classified as community engaged? Would they also do the same as we did? And so here's what we got to. Limitations a bit, sampling bias. So before we look at the results, everyone on this survey is someone that we self-identified as doing community-engaged research, knowing full well the definition is loose. Self-reported, no incentives. Over 400 people provided intense feedback, at least half of them with substantial comments, all without any incentives, which really showed us the dedication to this work. And also importantly, as we found in talking to our colleagues after we finished the work and visited the campuses, is the limitation that this work only involves the voice of the academic partner. a similar study or survey could be done with our community partners, and we wonder how they would define community engaged research. What are the infrastructure factors that would keep them engaged? So a lot more work to do there. And here's what we got. So we invited almost 3,000 people. So those are the 3,000 people that we spent trying to figure out if we could make sure someone else would validate that they are our community, somehow they are doing community engaged work. Predominantly tenured, and then tenured track, and then a lot that are not tenured track. They might be directors or others, they might have an academic position, but they're not tenure track. And then from those, you look at sort of the response rate in terms of the parentheses are actually the proportion it represents from the overall respondents. And so the majority of the respondents were tenured, followed by non-tenured track. You can imagine people on tenure track are busy doing other things, trying to get to the tenure point. So in terms of the actual response rate, similar pattern in terms of who we invited and who actually participated. The majority in terms of the highest response rate was non-tenure track individuals, followed by tenured and then those who are tenure track. Now, I picked a few demographics. There's a lot of wonderful results from this that will be coming out in a couple of papers, but here are just a few to whet the appetite of what this means, right? There is a University of California survey that actually, the documentation of what our faculty demographics look like, and that is on the column that says UC. The other column represents the proportion of individuals who represented that category, that demographic in our survey respondents. So tenured female in our survey was 54%. The UC incumbents, faculty who are tenured in 2013 was 28%. So not exactly half, but it shows you who's represented and in what way in our sample. 76% tenure track, so the smallest response rate, right? We had a hard time getting people to respond to, 76% tenure track female that were community engaged researchers. In the UC system, who do they represent in general? Tenure track female, 41%. Then you see our Latino numbers, almost double. African American, tenured, lower, and not much difference. So then we went into the criteria, and this is really important, sort of trying to figure out how do we define this work of community engagement. And these were all predefined categories, and we asked people to say, is this count as a criteria for community engaged research or not? They're in a descending order. Obviously, there's a benefit there for community members. A biggest one is it counts as community engaged if I can articulate a benefit, not just for the academic community, but also for a community stakeholder. As we get into the lower ones, obviously participating in interpretation of the results is harder. But I think what's interesting in this, if you look at 78% at the bottom, notice that the top criteria was community engaged research has a tangible benefit for the community stakeholder, but 78%, still high, but one of the lower criteria was there was an academic gain for scholarly work. Now, what does that mean? It could mean a lot of things, but it was interesting, although not dramatically different, 78%. It was lower in the sense of trying to pinpoint, I'm doing good work, it's scholarly, how do I contribute and bring that into my portfolio to count as academic? That's one way that this might be interpreted. So then we went into who values this work on your campus. These are the results across our sample for all the UCs. And these were all predefined categories. We asked people to say, is this important to this stakeholder from your perspective? No offense to the UC Regents, but at least in the sample of people who responded to our survey, which was fairly biased, only 34% felt that was an important criteria. Community engaged research is important to our Regents. The campus overall, pretty high, 70%. And then what you see there is sort of increasing order of who the respondents felt cared about this concept of community engaged research. The highest being community leaders in the region, in their immediate region. So if you're UCI or UCLA, the highest was there. The lower end are fundraising and development, marketing and communication. And in our discussions with faculty in each campus, this is what we found, that although this idea of community engagement, it seems so easy. Of course you would go out to the community and say, we're working with the community, our students are out there. We're fundraising, but articulating the research benefit of community engagement in communications and in fundraising and raising money specifically for community-engaged research, not only service learning and other activities that are community-engaged, may be more difficult, is what we're hearing from faculty at other campuses. This number may mean some of that. Peers were important. Graduate students were next in line for who these individuals thought were important stakeholders who cared about this as a topic, which speaks to who are we preparing, who's in the pipeline for URM researchers. Now I get to the heart of really what we did. There was a lot of questions, but the main emphasis of the study was about the infrastructure factors. This is where we weeded through the literature and we identified 12 factors that had fairly strong background that if you were going to create a culture, an ecosystem that supported this work on your campus, what would exist? What would be a visible, something that you could see in terms of your culture on your campus? And this is what we found in terms of how many of our respondents said, this thing, it exists well or very well on a 5-point scale on our campus. We're starting with 36%. So we're not starting very high. And we're only going to go less as I share the 12 factors with you. So in terms of the number of participants who felt the first one, in terms of having the people within the region served being receptive, which was one of the most important ones as stakeholders. 36% of our respondents felt that existed well or very well. And that's the highest that we got. Going down the line here, community organizations have the capacity. This gets back to what exists not just on campus, but off campus in terms of skills and resources and time to do this work that we all know takes a lot to do. Organizations the civic engagement is a core part of the mission. That seems kind of obvious. And then applying expertise of the university to the home community is important at all levels, from administration downwards. Now we just get lower. So 10% felt there was a program that exists to actually communicate this, tell the public, but also tell people on campus and students that we do community engaged research. This matters. We're a Carnegie classified institution, right? Communicating that. 10% of our respondents felt that existed on their campus. 8% felt that there was a one-stop shop. Award programs and forums to recognize and showcase, right, value this work. 6% it's included in strategic planning, actively, and also reporting. Right, so what counts is what gets measured. So if it's not actively there, not just in a mission statement, but actually in what are we counting and making progress to our objectives, it may not likely to be supported. And then we get to the last few. This is the lowest 4, but in many ways the most important. And we tried to prioritize these 12 indicators from high to low. This is not shown on this graph. But what we found in these results is it was a flipped priority list. The things that were higher, although they were still at 36%, were actually on the lower priority list of what the literature says are important infrastructure factors. These 4 are among the most important 12 infrastructure factors, and they ended up being among the lowest. 10-year review, right? Support, raising funds, indicators to measure and monitor progress and refinements and celebrate the successes of CNR on campus. And then last but not least, identifying campus resources. So this is what we know about the culture that at least our biased self-reported sample reported, and I think this is worth doing on a larger scale. Some ways, and 76% of our tenured track faculty responded and how they incorporate this into their work. This is not surprising, mostly in terms of research publications and grants, service, training people, publications that may be more lay audience friendly, and then teaching and service learning. Some of the comments in terms of what people were saying, the key to change, which is not a surprise to us, is the incentive and reward system. It should be assessed. If it's not assessed, it may not count. And this one came out quite a few, which was this incorporation of questions that would ask faculty researchers about community engagement during the IRB process. Do we put the pressure there? Maybe, maybe not, but it did come up as some other opportunity to ask the questions about where's community in this and value that as something within our campus research. Barriers, not surprisingly, is legitimacy. of this work in promotion. If it's not legitimized, and I think one of our speakers measured counting it is not enough, but legitimizing what counts is critical. The limited resources is not surprise, but the idea of more time, doing engaged research takes more time. At the same time that it requires more effort, university systems in terms of working with community partners are prohibitive in terms of contracting and reimbursing people for travel or some food. Can be cumbersome and actually slow down the process, separately from the amount of time it takes to actually do community-engaged research, finding the partners, recruiting people, preparing them. So this difference in terms of also the university practices that support paying for this kind of work. Facilitators, there's many, and I think these are very common that we've heard. In terms of probably the things that may stand out for us is really incorporating this into the rubric of evaluation, making sure it's connected with our work, knowing that this may take more time than traditional work, and then supporting programs on campus that do this outside of tenure and promotion, thinking about those other programs, communications units, fundraising units, developing units that actually support our work as well. So, implications. Again, this was very exploratory, so I want to be cautious of what we can or cannot make with some of the findings we have, but they're exciting enough, and I think it opens up the door to asking these questions in a larger level, and actually asking similar questions to community partners. But if we know that URM faculty are attracted to this work, as undergraduates, as graduate students, and then as actual faculty researchers, then campuses who are able to create the infrastructure that's more supportive of community-engaged research are probably also going to be doing the kinds of things that support URM faculty in general. And I think we've heard some of those earlier today. This just reinforces what we know, and it making community-engaged research a magnet that might actually attract people to this work if you're a URM researcher. And then the other main idea is really that the system-wide infrastructure factors outside of tenure and promotion and reward systems need to be taken into account. They also can support or hinder the work of community engagement and probably the work of URM faculty in general. They may make things to work faster, more efficiently, or more slowly. I want to close with one of my favorites, from one of the thought leaders of community engaged scholarship, which many of you probably know. This is really for students, but I think it equally applies to all of us in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. A 21st century education must prepare all of our students, and I would say all of us, to be creative, innovative solution finders who can deal with problems they have never seen before while working with people they have never met before, many of whom are very different in values, culture, experience, and expertise. And that's really what community engaged research is trying to do. And within that, supporting URM faculty researchers is probably by far the most important component. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes.
I noticed you included a number of folks as criteria for whom you contacted for the survey. Those who are directly involved in privilege and tenure review. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not necessarily community engaged researchers. So I'm just curious, did you split those folks out at all?
So we've done separate analysis by those groups as well. There weren't that many. In the overall 400, there were 12. So there weren't many. But we did make an effort to try to find people specifically who were on CAP, who had a history of community engagement in some way, thinking we might uncover something, very small number, but yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to comment that there is a long history of community engaged research that has come under different names starting in the 1960s. It was really about community control and trying to avoid the abuse of low-income racial and ethnic communities. So I think that's an important piece, that this is not new. Most of your community-engaged researchers would be underrepresented minority people, and now, of course, we know there's a push by NIH for community-engaged research. So, and my other comment was that there is a real concern among underrepresented minority faculty that the communities do not become the playground or the laboratory only for the benefit of faculty. So I'm wondering, in the leadership of the center, how many underrepresented faculty do you have? And number two, with the students, do they become part of your publication in terms of for the undergraduates, in terms of publications to journals? And do they get paid for this? And are they on your grants? I mean, what are the benefits to the actual students? And what is the understanding of the center that the students, you said they were interested in those three things. I think what we know is that they're interested in really solving the social and economic inequality issues that are in these communities.
Yeah. So in terms of I can imagine if we were to do the survey again, asking more questions about those students would be fantastic. Within our own Resource Center for Community Engaged Scholarship, again, having done this work now for quite a few years, I can only say yes, yes, yes to everything you said. So our leader in this, our director for that work, Robin DeLugan, is Native American. I feel we're cheating a little bit because at UC Merced, the majority of our students are first generation. We're Hispanic Serving Institute, so most of the students who are working in our center are coming from URM backgrounds. And we have been very fortunate to include them in grants and publications and include paid work. I think it's come up several times here that including pay, but also not at the lower end. On the student level, the higher pay is $11.50, and we're consistently at $11 and above, as opposed to the $9 fee. So small numbers, but I think that's important. Well, so a lot more to do, but yes, we're definitely doing that on our campus.
And in terms of the promotion and tenure, so your whole goal here is to figure out how the CAP, you call it CAP, how the CAP infrastructure values the work that's being done through this particular methodology?
Not just CAP, it's really about how does the campus create the right infrastructures for that, and CAP would be one of those. So the tenure and promotion and reward system is one, but there are other things that influence that work, which would be things like space to do the work, funding, people who are fundraising to help you, not just in terms of the grants that you're actually going after. Things like that are also important.
I think we'll have to again postpone this discussion until this afternoon because again, I'm getting the signal you need to move on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so the last presentation this morning I am going to make. Okay, we haven't moved to it yet. No, it's on. Did we bring it up? Okay, there it is. So this gets to a question that Harold asked, which was a central question. In addition to being the Associate Director for Advanced Program, am co-chair of our Policy and Practices Review Initiative. And one of the concerns we had is that there is documented bias in particularly federal grant review. And obviously, we all as institutions are joined at the hip fiscally with federal grants and obtaining federal funding. So the central question was, how can we maintain that strong positive fiscal relationship with bodies that have less than ideal demographics of the successful awardees? And I thought that in this presentation, I would both quickly go through and show you, especially with respect to UC, our dependence on these agencies, and then go over a summary of the research that is out there on bias in grant review. So this comes from our annual report by the Office of the President on fiscal grants. If you can see 2003, the total amount was $4.9 billion, $5.7 billion in 2014. Federal share went from 3.1 to 3.28, so up a little bit, but clearly we are diversifying the sources of support. This graph shows, however, even in doing that, we do have a strong reliance on federal support. It's been up and down over the years, depending upon what's happening with Congress. And this report also includes a lot of these pie diagrams. This one for all of UC, showing the shrinking of the blue, which is the federal funding. That is mirrored by some of our institutions, that UCLA, UCD, this is UC Merced, and this is Santa Cruz, which shows an even greater shrinking of the federal pool of money. And this graph shows that when we talk about the federal pool, for the most part, we're talking about NIH. Now, there have been quite a few studies on looking at who's being funded by NIH, is there bias, what's the nature of the bias, and then making recommendations to change the bias. So I put the list up here of the titles. These are all on your bibliography if you want to actually take a look at the specific papers that I'm going to be describing. But I thought we'd just go through these. The first one was already mentioned by Carrie Ann, is the Ginther study that came out in 2011 on race, ethnicity, and NIH research awards. And they made two main conclusions, and that is that Asians and African American applicants were less likely to receive NIH investigator-initiated research funding, and also that URM faculty generally needed more tries, more bites of the apple to get a grant funded, and were more likely to be deterred in the process and not keep submitting the grants to get funded in the first place. And this data shows the bar graphs they generated for Asians and African American. You might look at the Hispanic line, which is close to the overall, and the white line, and say everything looks great for Hispanic faculty, but in the paper they cite the difficulties in tweaking apart who's truly a URM Hispanic from Hispanics come from privilege, or international folks who have come to the United States. It's kind of hard to tweak that out. So they caution against interpreting too much with that data. Now, the second study I want to talk about, a series of studies, those from Paula Stephan, and I want to credit Paula with us actually designing the roundtable today the way that we designed it. Initially, our plan was to focus on the data, bring in the leading researchers, have them present the data, and when I contacted Paula, she basically said, yeah, I'd love to do that, but it's time to get past the data. So we decided to retool this, so we were actually moving past the data and would just give a summary of what that data shows. So her Economics of Science Funding for Research, I recommend that you all read that. There is a lot of great ideas and great analysis of where we are and how we got here. But one of the things that she did, and she focused on NIH simply because of the richness of the database. Right? So it's not that people are picking on NIH because NIH has a particular problem or issue, it's because of the richness of the database when you're doing these kinds of analyses. So what she did was basically compare funded, not funded, and look at metrics of the applicants, that is numbers of publications, pathway to where they are, that kind of thing. And what she found summarized here. There's no surprise to those of us in the STEM fields who are applying for federal funding. Results from the previous grant play an important role in evaluation. Okay, that means you have to have the grant first in order to be successful getting the next grant and the next grant. So it's very hard to break in, but it's not as hard to stay in once you're in, but there are some people who, once you're in and you're out, it's much harder to break back in. Okay. Clearly, highly valued are the demonstrated expertise in preliminary data. That means that any investment in startup funds is likely to have a positive impact on the awarding of grants. And if there's differential startup packages across institutions or across disciplines, then you're disadvantaging your faculty. Now, she also found from her comparative analysis that the lineage or the pathway, I like lineage of the scientists, often comes up as a important factor in the decisions that are made, meaning those with a lineage of top institutions tend to be more successful in getting funding than those who have not come from one of those pathways. And also, she said there seems to be some bias against folks who don't have the same magnitude, shall we say, it says adequate here, but I would say magnitude of space or what seems like institutional support. And then finally, she says that grants are scored on their doability, meaning is there enough preliminary data to suggest that this is low risk and is highly going to be successful and lead to publishable results. Now, the other thing that she included in here, she's one of the first people who looked at the aging of NIH investigators, as shown on this chart. So more senior investigators up at the top, younger investigators down at the bottom, the purple line that's barely visible, and showing that there has been a dramatic increase in investigators aged 55 and older that are successful grant awardees, and a corresponding decrease in younger faculty from obtaining grants. So this is a problem. We've all heard about this problem. She makes 3 conclusions from this, that one of the problems that's driving this age bias, if we want to call it age bias, is the need for preliminary results, which basically rewards people who have a longer track record than those who have a shorter track record. Second, she found that 70% of new investigators have to resubmit their proposals before receiving funding. 30 years ago, 85% of new investigators received funding on their first submission. So there's been a dramatic change in the competitiveness and the fortunes, shall we say, of junior investigators. NIH has addressed this by having special programs, but then the concern is, once you're out of that special program, how competitive are you in the future? And then the third reason she poses for the aging of investigators is that people are simply older by the time they get a tenure track position. They're in postdoctoral positions, held in postdoctoral positions for longer periods of time. That's very discipline specific, but that can lead to an older cadre of people who are applying for their first grant, which is still, a problem. And the other thing that she points out is that in looking at who's awarded funding and who isn't, and if you start looking at where they were, where the line cutoff was for successful awardees, that it's hard to see at that border what the real clear criteria were for the grants that were successful versus the ones that weren't. And I think pretty much all of you know that in this audience it becomes almost random. Flip of a coin, this one gets the funding, that one doesn't when you're at that border. Now, this is another diagram, another representation. It's more recent, and it was featured in Daniel's perspective that was published in PNAS in January, that in spite of all the fixes, it seems to be getting worse. We seem to still be shifting older and older. Her study was published in 2006. So if you can see, the faint blue line is sort of where we were in 1980, and the dark 2010 is where we are now. You can see we're just continually shifting towards older and older investigators. Now, many of you know Bruce Alberts and his cohorts wrote also a perspective in PNAS, came out last year, basically stating it's time for reform and it's time for meaningful change of how grants are awarded, how they're reviewed, and how they're evaluated. But I wanted to point out some of the points that they've made. The hyper-competitive funding system is, they say, highly discouraging to potential outstanding students and faculty, and we've seen that from the work that Ruth Zamban has presented, that this is discouraging. People see how hard it is, and if you're coming from a disadvantaged background, you know it's even harder for you to break in, so you're discouraged and you choose another path. The other point that they make, and I like their turn of phrase of the crippling demands on faculty time. This is one of the barriers that at least I've seen in discussing how do we change our own reward system. So we still value people who are successful at getting research grants, but we don't make it a criterion of you must have this, for advancement, especially given the bias inherent in those decisions. But what people respond to me as criticism is, well, if we tell faculty that this is lesser of a component of their advancement, giving this crippling demand, people are just going to stop doing it because this demand is so intense. So I think that's something we need to think about as an institution, and how do we get past that mentality that we have to force people to really do this because it's such an intense commitment of time and pressure that if you relieve it just a little bit, it's like popping a balloon, then people won't do it. Now, the other point that they go in that paper is that part of the problem is the assumption of continued growth of federal fundings that seems to be inherently built into our fiscal structures at the institutions, and that's not a reality anymore. So we keep thinking people can bring in more and more and more grants when the grant pool isn't growing as fast enough as the demand on the grant dollars are growing. And this has led to that perverse incentive that we've already heard about of postdocs coming in really low-level salary positions because of the changes that we need to make in terms of how we even view supporting our junior colleagues and the trade-offs, as pointed out, between, I can get more equipment if I have a lower-cost postdoc. I know many of our institutions, graduate students now cost more than postdocs, and that's a really bad thing. And again, the system favors those who can guarantee results. Now, I want to end with a discussion of Danielle Lee's study because she took a new spin on looking at NIH. And the thing that she added was, instead of just looking at successful and non-successful grants, she included the makeup of the study section and divided the study section into permanent reviewers on the study section and then the temporary reviewers that are brought in but are not permanent members, and to see what are the real criteria that these individuals are using based on searching them, Google searching them, and finding out what their area of research interests are versus the individuals who are applying for funding. And what she found listed here, reviewers do show a tendency to be biased towards people from their own subfield, but they seem to be more informed about quality, and I'll get back to what she means by quality, and they're making better decisions based on quality of that work. If you hold quality as a constant factor, then the permanent members have much more of a say in who gets funded than the temporary members on the study sections. Again, no surprise to those of us who've served on study sections as permanent or temporary members. In addition, reviewers on the committee can shape the decisions of those of other people on the committee, and she refers to this as sort of an information bias. And we can think of it as a network bias. I know them, they're part of my network, I can really speak positively towards their abilities beyond what might come across in paper on the grant. Now, there have been other studies that show the opposite, that if you're part of my network and you're a direct competitor, and I probably should be declaring a conflict of interest, if I don't, then I can make sure your grant isn't funded because then I won't have the competition. And she said gains associated with review that's biased by experts, in her view, dominate the losses. So what does that mean? So this is a quote from her study, and this was the inspiration for the fault in our metrics question mark. And what she means by related applicants is that they're related to people serving on the study committee professionally, not personal relationship or anything like that. And she concludes that eliminating information bias and this related bias would reduce the quality of NIH-supported research portfolio by 2 to 3%. And here's the key thing, as measured by future citations and publications. Those are the metrics we all use. Number of publications impact of the journals, numbers of citations. And the data clearly shows that there is a problem. And here's a graph, I think it's hard to see, of funded in light gray, unfunded in light gray, funded in black, and citations. And what she did was she looked at citations that came out of the grant. So her premise, which we all know this is true, is that you put in a grant to do something that you basically already have done, and you're going to have a publication come out on that same topic in the next year. So she was looking at the citations on the publications that came out from the next year for funded and unfunded, and found that funded tended to have more citations. Obviously, they're part of the network, they're getting into better journals, so it's this self-fulfilling model, circular model that Carrie Ann was talking about, that if that's our metric, people who already are in the club get to stay in the club, and it's really hard to break into the club. So the conclusions, bias does exist. Bias is documentable. Bias, if we believe Daniel Lee, is basically due to the metrics of quality that we ourselves use in our everyday lives, and that there might be a problem in reliance on grants as a metric of excellence because you are compounding the implicit bias, institutional bias, everything that is part of the grant review process. And also that UM faculty are extremely discouraged, or UM students and postdoctoral fellows in the pipeline extremely discouraged from this pursuing an academic career because of not just the bias that is being talked about in review process, but also because of the crippling demands on time. Okay, so I want to end here. We don't have any time for questions. I didn't really expect questions on mine because this is just presenting the data. I want to give you some guidance on what we're going to be doing at lunch. Everybody has been assigned a table, which is the bottom of your name tag. Each table will have a question, and apologize beforehand, some of these questions could be a roundtable in and of themselves. But our goal is to get people to start discussing some of the issues that we've been talking about this morning. And we will, at the end, hopefully come up with clear direction for how to move forward as an institution and what's the best ways to move forward as an institution. Each table has an individual who has been identified as a scribe. That individual can also report out for that table when we have the broader discussion, or if you want to do it differently on your table, that's fine with us. So I want to thank all of our speakers this morning for their absolutely wonderful presentations, and Ruth again for last night, so thank you. Everything has been filmed. We'll send you the link so that you can review everything if you want to. Lunch is out in the lobby area, and take your things with you because we'll be staying out in the lobby area for the discussion. It's much lighter, brighter, and easier to see people out there. So thank you, and hope you enjoy lunch.